Ever wondered why dumb artworks sell for millions while your art, seemingly way better, doesn't get any eyeballs? Well, the shocking truth is that intelligence isn't always an advantage in the marketplace. Today we'll reveal what dumb artists know and smart artists don't, give you some shocking examples of dumb artists making millions, as well as give you some easy actionable steps that these dumb artists use. The first question we have to answer is, does the market favor dumb artists over smart artists? Well, let's take a look at a case study of Erich Segal. Erich Segal is working at the University of Yale and Harvard, and he is not really completely satisfied. There's a lot of pressure coming from the academic world. He has to dance to their strings. He doesn't have a lot of freedom. On top of that, his books don't really get too many readers, and so he has this desire to get more readers and get some kind of fame. And he comes up with the following idea: well, what if I do the complete opposite of what I've been doing my whole life, which is writing very intellectual, complex academic literature? And so what he decides is to write something extremely simplistic that everybody can understand, something really dumb, topic that is so obvious, so rudimentary, a love story, for example. And he calls his book Love Story. Now, the decision to write something dumb is kind of a joke and a very risky one. I mean, if you're working at Yale and Harvard, there are expectations. You cannot just randomly make a creative decision that completely flops and then have no repercussions whatsoever. And so he's taking this risk. He's very aware of the fact that this could cost him his entire career. And so he decides to write this book. And what happens? It becomes a huge success. Millions of books sold, movies made about the book, and everything that you can imagine. And so the question, does the market favor dumb artworks, favor dumb artists over smart artists, or is this some kind of anecdotal exception to the rule? Well, in order to answer this, let's take a look at the Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon. Now, in order to explain the Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon, let's take a look at the meteoric rise of street art. Before 2000, street art is considered vandalism. It's considered a thorn in the eye of the public, an attack to architecture, an attack to culture. Nobody likes it. And then, early 2000s, it started to get some recognition. People are starting to notice it, but figures like Banksy, very easy digestible art, critic towards particular political ideas and all of that stuff. And then in the mid to late 2000s, three things happen. Number one, the traditional media sources start to feature Banksy, start to feature street art in a positive daylight. Now, these are authoritative sources that people trust. The second thing that happens, 2008, there's an economic crash. Everything goes to dust. People are starting to complain. Why are my groceries suddenly so expensive? Why can I not pay for my mortgage anymore? And so what happens in a moment like that? Well, people start to become a little bit more anti-establishment. They are blaming the political leaders. They are blaming the authority figures. And so that's the second thing that happens. And then the third thing that happens, well, we all know what happened. Social media blew up out of nowhere. And so on social media, the public got a voice and they started sharing street art. They started sharing Banksy. And as all of us know, social media is not a local thing, but it's a global thing. And so it got shared globally all over the world in no time. But what happens here is a very good example of the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, which states that when you learn something new for the first time, it suddenly appears everywhere. It suddenly looks like it appears everywhere. It's also known as the frequency illusion, and it's a good explanation for why some things gain in popularity so quickly. And so what happens in our street art example is that suddenly, out of nowhere, street art appears to be everywhere. Auction houses start selling street art, galleries start selling street art, collectors start wanting, craving street art, and specifically Banksy. And so this still leaves us with the question, why specifically Banksy? What is it about Banksy, and what does this whole thing have to do with dumb artists making millions? Well, there's one thing that Banksy has that all of these other street artists don't seem to have. Let's take a look at the Banksy work. Flower Twirl, for example. Now, most of you don't know anything about this work, but as it appears on the screen, you immediately know what it's about. You know that it's about war, that the soldier that is depicted is not throwing a Molotov cocktail or some stone, but he's throwing flowers. So it's also about peace, and it challenges this whole war peace type of thing. Okay, cool. Now, if you would know more about it, the work would get more meaning and more depth. For example, the first time he made this piece is at the border of Israel and Palestine, and so you get that whole conflict that's also added to the story, and you get the idea. It becomes more complex, but initially you understand it fully. Now let's compare this to another street artist who is equally talented, also very famous within the scene, but not the same type of fame as Banksy. Let's take a look at Blue's work. Now, this work, without knowing anything about it, what is it about? Who knows? Like, one guy is pulling a mask from another guy. What does that mean? I have no idea. And the first time I saw it, I also had no idea. Now, after further investigation, you kind of see like, okay, one of them is making the W sign, the other one is making the E sign. It's hanging in Berlin, so it's probably about East Coast and West Coast, and it's challenging this whole conflict with the Berlin Wall. And you can start getting into the work, but initially, it's just simply too complex to understand. You can't understand it in 5 seconds or less. Whereas Banksy's work, you can very easily understand it in 5 seconds or less. And so what happens if you share Blue's work on social media via Banksy's work on social media? Well, Banksy will immediately get attention, will immediately get shares, will immediately elicit some kind of emotional response. And so on the social media landscape, Banksy's work has a huge advantage over Blue's work. And so what do we see here? Well, we see that the medium is the messenger. In a social media landscape, Banksy's work has a huge advantage over Blue's work. In a different landscape, in a different context, Blue's work might have had a huge advantage over Banksy, but that was not the landscape that we were living in 2008. Now, a follow-up question, of course, becomes, can the success of Banksy really be attributed to just the medium as the messenger, or are there other factors at play that Dries is conveniently neglecting? Well, let's think about this. Let's imagine that Banksy is going to the 16th century and he is going to Florence or Antwerp or any of the art hubs at that time, and he is going to the patrons and introducing his amazing work to these patrons who have all the decision-making power in the world. What would he talk about? Well, this is my work, it's a flamethrower, but it's flowers. Like, the conversation would be over in 2 minutes. He wouldn't have anything to talk about to these patrons because the work is so easily digested that it's not a conversation piece. It's not a conversation piece in that setting. It is on social media where you have 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 15 seconds, but if you need an hour-long conversation or a 2-hour-long conversation where you have to convince that patron, well, this work falls short. If you compare it, however, to, for example, a Peter Paul Breugel's The Blind Leading the Blind, well, you can talk about that work for hours. You could write a whole book about that one single piece. As a matter of fact, there are people who wrote books about that. If you compare it to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, he spent 4 years making that piece. Of course, he would be able to talk for hours and hours on end. The reality of the situation is that Banksy would get crushed by Peter Paul Bruegel in that scenario. As a matter of fact, Banksy would probably just make completely different art in that scenario, in that time. And of course, the opposite is true as well. The Sistine Chapel ceiling on social media in the 21st century, it wouldn't be worth it to spend 4 years just to get 1 or 2 videos go viral about your 4-year work. On top of that, those videos would appear right after a 27-year-old hot girl that is literally the symbol of impossible beauty because she has filters all over the place. I mean, even the Sistine Chapel can't really compete with that. And so the medium is the messenger. The reality is that in the 16th century, people were craving intellectual, complex art with deep meanings, hidden messages, hidden narratives that could be talked about for hours, that people could write books about, because books were one of the marketing sources. Books were the media of that time, and you better make sure that people, smart people, can write about your work if you want it to go viral, whatever viral means in the 16th century. Today, however, the market demands are completely different. People expect simple art. They demand simple art. They react to simple art because the medium is the messenger. Now, does this phenomenon just show us that easy digestible art is favored in the marketplace at this moment, or does intelligence negatively impact your chances of success? And what would that even mean if that would be the case? Well, if that would be the case, it would mean that there's some kind of underlying psychological phenomena that drives people to 5-second consumption windows, so that they are simply not capable anymore of diving very deep into meaningful, complex content. And so is that the case? Is there such a psychological phenomenon at play at this moment? Well, of course there is, otherwise this section wouldn't exist in this video, and it's a phenomenon that I came across in real life once more just a couple of days ago. So here's what happens. I'm working out, heavy lifts, heavy sets, and I'm already very hungry. And so after the workout, I look in the fridge and what I see is that there's barely any food left. There's 40 grams, 50 grams of protein, perhaps at best, some vegetables. And so I decide to cook some food. But here's the thing. Ideally, you want to eat right after your workout because that's optimal for muscle building type properties anyway. I'm cooking the food. And I was kind of lazy throughout that day, so I decided the following thing, that I'm going to listen to an audiobook while I'm cooking the food. And so I'm listening to an audiobook, cooking the food, and I'm smelling something, but it takes a while. It takes a minute or 2 minutes before I process the smell and actually realize what is happening, namely that the food is completely burning. So I quickly stop the whole thing, protein is burned, and my food is basically ruined. And so now as a result, I have to order some food, completely missing my eating window. The whole thing is kind of stupid. But anyway, this whole scenario is a very good example of the cognitive load theory, which states that at any given moment, any one of us has a limited amount of bandwidth, a limited amount of processing power to process all the information that is coming into your brain. And so what happened there is that I was way too busy with the audiobook trying to listen to that, and then the food was burned. And here's the best part. When I tried to remember what I read in the audiobook, I couldn't remember a single thing because my brain was overloaded. I was trying to do two things and ended up getting none of those two things because of the cognitive load theory. Now, what does this have to do with making money and whether or not intelligence negatively impact your chances of success? Well, follow me here for a moment. In 2023, approximately estimated 328.7 million terabytes of data are produced every single day. That's 60 times more than in 2010. And so what does that mean? Well, people are being bombarded with more content when they are scrolling on Instagram in one single day than in a whole year of the 16th century or 19th century combined, perhaps even a whole decade. And so what happens in that scenario? Well, we just saw it. The cognitive load theory suggests that people have a maximum amount of processing capacity. And so what happens when you get bombarded with your friends texting you, a billboard over there, some ad over here, you're scrolling on Instagram, constant notifications, emails all over the place, you're simply have enough. And this cognitive load, the maximum load that you can handle, is probably already reached at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. And then the rest of the day, well, the rest of the day, what happens is that you are craving easy to digest things because your brain is simply full. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that there is a demand in the marketplace for easy to digest things. And when there's demand like that, the people who make easy to digest things win in the marketplace. And when people are winning in the marketplace, what does the marketplace do? What do the losers in the marketplace do? Well, the losers, they look at those winners and they think by themselves, well, we are going to copy paste this because we also want to win. And so lo and behold, what we have in the 21st century is a lot of easy to digest stuff because people can't handle anything complex anymore. And it's not just art. You can see this all over the place in all industries everywhere. Take a look at architecture, for example. Who is building these amazing Gothic cathedrals that are full of beauty, full of sculptures, glasswork, mosaic type of stuff? Who is making that type of stuff in the 21st century? Who is making the type of building that once you see it for the 145th time, you still discover new things? You are still mesmerized by things you didn't saw earlier. Who makes those buildings anymore? Nobody. All of the buildings are just empty, minimalistic cubes, and that's it. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I love the architecture of the 21st century. I love the Banksy of the 21st century. I'm just saying that the marketplace has changed, and we have to realize that. If we want to sell products, if we want to sell artworks, if we want to gain some kind of notoriety, some kind of fame, some kind of freedom that comes with that, then the only possible way is to realize that the market demands easy digestible stuff at this moment. Now, am I saying that we should dumb down our artworks in order to give them a chance of virality, in order to give them a chance of success? Well, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. If we want to get virality, if we want to have success on social media or traditional media platforms, then we have to dumb it down. And let me give some more nuance to this. It doesn't mean that we can't make complex works anymore. We can make complex works, we can make complex products, but we have to make sure that there are easy digestible features to the art that we make, so that they can easily be understood on social media, so that they can be shared, so that they can be consumed, so that the whole thing can run. And in that light, recently I was thinking about my older works, the works that I made 10 years ago. And if we look at it from that daylight, we can start to criticize some of my earlier work. For example, 10 years ago I was making paintings with lightning, 30,000 volts of static electricity, one of the most original pieces of art that were created in the 21st century. Only one person can paint with that, only one person knows that process, and it's a completely new way of painting with a completely new aesthetic to it. Very original work, very authentic work, amazing work. But how shareable is that? If we look at that, can people understand in less than 5 seconds that it is made with static electricity? Up to 30,000 volts? Of course not. They can see that. It's not easy digestible. It's not that shareable. It's less marketable than I kind of would have wanted it to be. And so then the question becomes, how can we make sure that our products, our offerings, our artworks are digestible in nature? And so here's what I did. I made a checklist that we can go through when we are making art, when we are making anything basically. And if you go through that checklist and you can see that your artwork checks the boxes, you are 100% certain that it is shareable, that it has viral opportunities. And that's what we kind of want in the 21st century. And when you take this checklist and you compare it to my older work, or your older work for that matter, probably I'm assuming here, then you can very easily see that it simply doesn't check those boxes. It simply doesn't check the boxes of virality, of 21st century consumption behavior. And besides this list, just for fun, I also made a list of what this checklist would have looked like in the 16th century. And it's kind of funny, if you compare the two checklists to each other, then you can kind of see how the 21st century is just completely different. And a lot of artists in the 21st century are making art that would have been in line with the 16th century checklist and not the 21st century checklist. And I've made these checklists available for free, of course, since everything I've been doing on this channel has been available for free. Link is in the description. That said, get the hell out of here.